What do you think about this chord progression? There's a link between all the chords that is smooth and pleasing to the ear. Knowing how these tracks work will transform your chord progressions. So in this video, I'm going to reveal what these tracks are, how you can use them to create a smooth journey, and the world of variation and interest this will open up in your own songwriting. Have you ever travelled on a train and stared at the tracks out of the window? As you move to the next station, the distance between the tracks can vary. Sometimes it feels like you are so close to the next track, you're going to crash into another train. Then once you arrive at the station, there will be a certain number of platforms that the tracks join into. You can think of your chord progressions in a similar way. Each chord is like a station, with a set number of platforms, but in the chord's case, it is constructed with a series of notes. When you play a chord progression, you move from one chord to the next, from station to station. The rail tracks are what join up the stations, and in a similar way, the notes in your chords are connected. The distance between these notes can vary, much like the train track. And over the course of a progression, or song, this movement can be large or small. For example, look at this progression in the key of C major, 4-1-5-1. All of the chords are in root position. Listen to how the gaps between the notes are quite large, creating a jumpy feel to the chord changes. This would be like a track connecting two stations with a sharp turn or a steep incline. You ultimately get to your destination, but the journey is less comfortable, slower and unpleasant. You get a similar jumpy feeling if you play these as standard open chords on the guitar. Here's how that sounds. If you want 6 popular chord progressions and 7 easy major keys to try them out in, then head to majorkeychords.com and grab your free major key chord guide today. Link is also in the description. Compare the previous 2 examples to this version. You'll hear the same chords in the same order, but with a very different feel. This is more like a track in real life. Rail engineers generally keep tracks close together and with the smallest possible movement to create a smooth, quick ride and minimise construction costs. You can be like the rail engineer when looking at the movement of notes between chords in your own chord progressions. This process of minimising the movement of notes between chords is called voice leading. Let's zoom in on 2 chords from the previous progression to look at this in detail. The 1 chord is C major. It has the notes C, E and G. The 5 chord is G major. This has the notes G, B and D. Here are those notes on the piano roll. The chord letter or name, also known as root notes, are played as the lowest notes, and then the other notes are stacked above this in order. These are known as root position chords. You can see that the whole chord shape is moving down to accommodate the low G note. This creates that jumpy feel, which you can hear again now. So what can be done to minimise this movement? If you think about a train track, the fastest route between 2 stations is in a straight line. In a similar approach, the first thing you want to look for with your progressions are notes that are shared across chords. The reason for this is because they require no movement at all, like the straight track, and are therefore a great place to build your chord voicings around. In this example, you can see that both chords have a G note, so I'll move the second G note up an octave, and you can now see that there's no movement with this note between the chords. There is a straight track between the 2. Be aware that this is now an inverted chord. If you want to maintain the feel of the existing chord progression, you need to keep the same bass note. In this example, you would still play G in the left-hand bass to keep this progression as it was. The other 2 notes in the chords can stay as they are. You can see that E moves down 1 scale step to D, and C moves down 1 scale step to B. This is like 2 tracks moving together at the same rate in order to create an optimal curve in the line. With voice leading, this is known as parallel motion. This is an important type of motion that sounds good, and you'll want to include it where possible. Let's listen to how this now sounds. This approach is very natural and logical on the piano, but it is something that many guitarists are not aware of. Guitarists will tend to just learn certain chord shapes, and whenever a chord needs to be played, they will default to the only shape they know. But if you think about the notes in your chords, then you can open up the neck to some interesting voice leading considerations which will bring new sounds to your playing. I'll take the last example and play it as some simple triads on the guitar. You can clearly see how each line moves. C drops a half step to B, E to D, and G is maintained. Remember that the second chord is an inversion, in this case a first inversion G chord, because the lowest note is now B. If you're struggling to maintain the root note for your chord progression whilst still being able to play the other notes, you can always get the bass player in your band, or record a bass track, to free you up when voicing the rest of the chord. When planning a railway, although it is most common for tracks to move at the same rate, this isn't the only way. You'll also find moments where tracks move in opposite directions away from each other, or where one track stays the same and another one moves. The movement of notes in your chord voices can also follow these ideas. One of these is called contrary motion, where voices move in opposite directions. Let's look at the previous example with the 5 and 1 to see this in action. A common thing you'll see in major keys is to play the 5 chord as a dominant 7th. This adds a 4th note to the chord. Here I'm playing G major as the 5 chord, so I'll now play G dominant 7th. This adds an F note to the chord. Here's how that sounds in root position, moving to the 1 chord C major in root position. One thing to be mindful of with voice leading is trying to keep the same number of voices. Here I have introduced an extra note with the G7, but don't panic, it's really common to omit certain notes from chords. A popular and easy note to remove is the 5th note. This can allow you to double up other notes to better achieve smooth voice leading. In this case, I'll take out the 5th note D, so I have 3 voices left. As before, the common note is G, so I'm going to move that up an octave to be the same as the C chord G note. What is left is a smooth contrary motion. The 7th note F moves down half a step to E, and the B note moves up half a step to C. If you're aware of the C major scale, you'll know that the 7th note is B. The 7th note of the major scale is also known as the leading note or tone. This has a really strong desire to resolve to the root note of the scale. In this case, this note is C. As you saw from the example, this movement is contained within the 5-to-1 chord change, which is important for creating cadences in major key progressions. Let's have a listen to this changed progression now. Pay attention to how the G7 chord still sounds correct despite missing its 5th. Remember that you don't have to voice lead if you don't want to, but it is a really useful tool to have in your songwriting toolbox. I'll now look at a longer progression to show you the potential for this approach on both piano and guitar. I'll also bring in a non-diatonic chord to show how useful these can be. The progression is again in the key of C major. It is 1, 4, 5 of 5, 5, with the chords C major, F major, D major and G major. I want the first repeat to have a rising up ascending feeling, and then the second repeat to intensify this. I'll start with the bass note in the left hand on the piano, C, F, D and G. It's worth mentioning the secondary dominant D major chord. This is from outside of the key and introduces an F sharp note. I'm going to use this note to help create the rising up feeling. You'll see a half step rising line, E, F, F sharp, G, which takes us from 1 to 5. Secondary dominant chords provide a strong draw to target notes, and you can see that at work here. The F sharp note wants to strongly resolve up to the G note in the G major chord. In the second half, I switch over to the guitar and reimagine the progression. I'm going to keep the same bass notes so these feel like standard chords and not full inversions, and each chord has 4 notes. I'm now taking that E, F, F sharp, G line and making it the highest in the progression. This further intensifies the feeling as it drives towards the tonic. Have a listen to this progression and then have a go at voice leading it for yourself. I have to admit at this point that you might have just wasted your time. The thing is, everything I just told you is completely useless if you don't know how to construct chords. Watch the video on screen next to learn how easy it is to build 31 different types of chords and then use them in your own progressions.